Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
On a scheduling note, tomorrow, President Trump will travel to the great state of Florida to attend the opening of a new illegal alien detention center located at Dade Collier Training and Transition Airport alongside Secretary Kristi Noem, Governor Ron DeSantis, Congressman Byron Donalds, and other state and local leaders. We hope to see many of you there. The facility is in the heart of the Everglades and will be informally known as Alligator Alcatraz. There is only one road leading in, and the only way out is a one-way flight. It is isolated and surrounded by dangerous wildlife and unforgiving terrain. The facility will have up to 5,000 beds to house, process, and deport criminal illegal aliens. This is an efficient and low-cost way to help carry out the largest mass deportation campaign in American history.
It's the latest move of the Trump administration. A facility made of tents and trailers filled with cages and bunk beds has been built in just 8 days. Their plan is to begin housing immigrants there within days. While the Trump administration hails the facility as having air conditioning, what it doesn't have is any privacy. In fact, the images and videos we've seen look a lot like the prisons in El Salvador that the United States has been sending immigrants to for life sentences. Their plan for Alligator Alcatraz is initially to house 3,000 immigrants there, with the capacity for holding up to 5,000. In order to speed up the process, they're planning to deputize the National Guard as immigration judges to move the cases through quickly.
Anna Giratelli with Washington Examiner. Governor DeSantis has proposed using National Guard, deputizing them as immigration judges to get through this massive backlog of people in the immigration court. Would you be open to that?
Yes, he has my approval. Okay. That wasn't too hard to get, was it, right in front? He didn't even have to ask me, James. You didn't even need James to ask me. He has my approval, okay?
While the images and videos are quite difficult to see, what makes Alligator Alcatraz especially horrifying is how it's surrounded by swampland, including alligators and snakes. Here's President Trump laughing about the immigrants running in swerved or straight lines in an attempt to evade the alligators and snakes.
I guess that's the concept. This is not a nice business. I guess that's the concept. If the snakes are fast, but alligators are, we're going to teach them how to run away from an alligator, okay? If they escape prison, how to run away. Don't run in a straight line. Run like this. And you know what? Your chances go up about 1%. Okay? Not a good thing.
And the hilarity doesn't stop there. Trump's personal advisor, Laura Loomer, who is often in the White House, wrote on X, "Alligator Alcatraz, feeding illegals to the gators. We need more of this energy. Alligator lives matter. The good news is, alligators are guaranteed at least 65 million meals if we get started now," unquote. But where is she getting the 65 million figure from? Remember, there are only around 11 to 12 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S. today. However, in 2022, there were nearly 64 million Latino people living in the United States. So it seems reasonable to wonder if that's where she's getting her 65 million figure from. That would mean we would be feeding all Latino people in the nation to alligators. Similarly, Nancy Mace is a congresswoman in South Carolina. She was hailed as the first Republican woman from South Carolina to be elected to Congress, but she posted on X, quote, "Dear DHS, we've got a swamp and a dream. Let's talk. South Carolina Gators are ready, and they're not big on paperwork. If I was governor, we'd be bringing Alligator Alcatraz to South Carolina." Of course, hearing these comments is very disturbing for those who care about our Latino neighbors. But it's also especially frustrating given how conservatives have consistently condemned us for wanting to talk about our nation's racial history. We've all heard the saying, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And when we look back at our racist past, we find out that white people being fascinated with alligator on human violence is nothing new. The Roanoke Times wrote in 1890, quote, "Babies wanted for crocodile bait," unquote. They added, quote, "When a dark brown infant with curling toes sits on a bank and blinks at them, they throw off their cloak of laziness and make their preparations for a delicate morsel," unquote. In a story titled, "Yes, White People Feeding Black Babies to Alligators Really Happened," Dr. Allison Wiltz shares quotes and screenshots from newspapers all over the nation, from South Florida to Salt Lake, of white people using black people as alligator bait, including artwork that was created of black people being dangled over alligators or even being eaten. One picture is a framed photograph of 9 black babies with the headline underneath them being "alligator bait." Songs have been written about this. For example, "Have you met the Florida Gator? He's the champion Negro hater. Although he finds many things to eat, his favorite morsel is Negro meat." I'll link to Dr. Wiltz's piece in the Substack I send out with each episode. If you want to receive that, you can subscribe at rickpidcock.substack.com. But this is why studying our racial past is so important. It's not about attacking white people for things today's white people haven't done. It's about learning how white people in the United States have harmed their non-white neighbors, and then doing the work that is necessary to heal those wounds that have been passed down through generations and to restore relationships. But rather than reflecting, repenting, and repairing, white conservatives think it's hilarious. In addition to all the individuals on social media laughing about it, the Florida GOP created a post saying, quote, "Feds approve Alligator Alcatraz, Florida's gator-guarded prison for illegal aliens. Surrounded by swamps and pythons, it's a one-way ticket to regret. Grab our merch to support tough-on-crime borders. Limited supply. Get yours before the gators do." They're literally selling Alligator Alcatraz merch. In fact, if you go to Amazon and search Alligator Alcatraz merch, you'll find hats, t-shirts, magnets, and other items with Alligator Alcatraz written on them. Father James Martin shared a picture of Trump, DeSantis, and Noam yucking it up outside the cages, and he said, quote, "Laughing in front of cages designed to hold migrants and refugees, many of whom came to this country fleeing extreme violence and poverty, and hoping to raise their children in a more compassionate country, and many of whom followed all the legal procedures to enter the country. And remember, 93% have no record of any violent crimes. This facility, then, is comparable to the internment camps for Japanese Americans during the Second World War. But let's call it what it is, a concentration camp. Jesus wept." If 100 years ago, white people were joking about black people being eaten by alligators, and then today white people are joking about Latino people being eaten by alligators, that's kind of a parallel of violence worth wondering about. But rather than reflecting on how messed up this whole thing is, the GOP wants more of it.
Mr. President, given the likelihood of the One Big Beautiful Bill passing, and we look forward to the success of this facility here, how many more facilities like this do you feel that the country needs in order to enact your agenda of mass deportations?
Well, I think we'd like to see them in many states, really, many states. This one, I know Ron's doing a second one, at least a second one, and probably a couple of more. And, you know, at some point they might morph into a system where you're going to keep it for a long time. You know, it's not that far away from jails that take years to build, and money is spent and wasted. And, you know, like the railway that they have in California that costs like 40 times more than it was supposed to cost. The same things happens with prisons. You look at this in a short period of time, Ron, James, and some of the people that really worked on it along with our people, they did this in less than a week. And you look at it, it's incredible.
I had an unexpected conversation with my 7-year-old the other day when she asked me, "Do you guys like Trump?" So I said, "No." And she asked why. So I told her, because he brags about himself all the time and is mean to people. Then she asked, "What does he do that's mean?" And I answered, "He puts people in cages that are surrounded by alligators." You'd think that was hyperbole. You'd think I'd be making that up. If I would have written on social media prior to the election that Trump was going to put non-criminal immigrants in cages surrounded by alligators, the conservatives who follow me on social media would have rolled their eyes. And yet here we are. And to make matters even worse, the facility is in the middle of hurricane territory. Of course, the Trump administration claims the facility can withstand Category 2 winds, but how can we assume they're telling us the truth? Even if they are telling the truth, recent storms have exceeded those limits. And even if the facilities were to remain intact, there could be flooding. Imagine all those immigrants trapped in cages, not able to escape, when suddenly the alligator and python-infested swamps come flooding in during a hurricane at night. The inhumanity and the cruelty is beyond comprehension. This past Saturday, after I returned home from the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship General Assembly, I attended a Principles First event that featured Christianity Today's Russell Moore, former United States Representative Bob Inglis, and South Carolina Representative Neil Collins. I'll be sharing more audio from this event in future episodes, as well as a lot more from Russell Moore's interview. But for today, I want to preview some of that content by sharing Moore's answer to a question from a woman who was in attendance. I've gone to a lot of center-left events over the past year that have been processing Trump and the MAGA movement's control and threat to our democracy, but I wanted to hear what a center-right gathering would have to say. These aren't some stereotypical reactionary liberals who are just upset their team lost. These are Republicans. And during the Q&A, one woman in particular was really struggling with the cruelty of her party. So she asked Russell Moore for his thoughts. But before I play this clip, I want to mention that this was before all the talk this week about Alligator Alcatraz. This was before the merch. So whatever feelings are being processed in this audio, it's even worse just a couple days later.
The thing that I feel the most despair about right now is, you mentioned, the cruelty. Particularly in the last couple of weeks, the videos of landscapers being thrown to the ground and beaten, and it's going to make me cry. An Iranian woman in LA being thrown to the ground and handcuffed. And there are many of our fellow citizens who get off on this, who love seeing it. And many of them are evangelicals. What has happened, and how do we overcome that?
Well, I think there were certain practices that became normalized and central within evangelicalism. Evangelicalism turned into a political. This is one of the things that concerned me the most. I heard somebody one time on, I think it was on NPR, saying, in 2015, 2016, you could hear Russell Moore going through the stages of grief. Because at first he was saying, well, yeah, but these aren't evangelicals supporting Trump. And then it was, well, these aren't church-going evangelicals that are supporting Trump. And then it was, well, these are lesser of two evils type voters. And what we have, and what I said in my own defense was, there was a little bit of naivete there, but at every point that I was saying that was true. And that's what I was worried about, is the kind of people that were saying to me, well, we're going to be in this direction politically, but we're not for all of that. That's not the way tribalization works in American life right now. You have very few people who are able to say, well, I'm kind of with you on that, I'm completely opposed to you on that, and I'm going to call it out. Instead, they adapt and they conform, and then ultimately turn that into the standard of what righteousness is. And those who are not aligned with it are then exiled. And when you have I've mentioned this many times, the sense of despair that I started to have when I started hearing multiple pastors who would tell me the exact same thing, that they stood up and sort of parenthetically said in a sermon, when someone strikes you on the cheek, turn the other one. And people would come up after and say, where did you get those liberal talking points? And when the pastor would say, I'm literally quoting Jesus Christ, the thing that was shocking to me is not that you had people didn't say, oh, you're right, I need to spend some more time in Sunday school. Is that people would say, yeah, that was okay for then, but not now, the stakes are too high. as though Jesus is preaching the Sermon on the Mount in Mayberry. I mean, it is a kind of cruelty that can feel like righteousness and feel like conviction, because it's a kind of fake spiritual warfare where you don't actually have to be virtuous.
But how do we overcome it?
I think you have to have people who are willing to model something different, and people who are willing to say this is a long game. You're not going to be able to change that in the short term. And so if what we think is, okay, we've got to change the country, or we've got to change the church, we're going to yield to despair or cynicism. And usually what cynicism looks like is, well, I mean, you just have to join into the same game. We can't do that. Instead, what we have to do is to say, we have to cultivate a new generation that at least sees the option of a different way of living, where compassion is not weakness, where virtue is not being a loser, all of those kinds of things. That has to be a long-term project, or we're simply going to yield it, we're going to give up. And I mean, part of the thing is, I mean, right now in American life, part of the problem is you have this sense of an expectation of total winners and total losers. So every election is either the exuberance of we won it all, they're gone, or we've lost everything, we're gone. Well, in no election in American life is half of the country raptured. We're all still going to be here. And so you don't have any final victors, you don't have any final losers. And you have to have people who are willing to say, even though I'm living in a really sad and twisted sort of time, I'm going to refuse to give into it. I'm going to refuse to be it. So you can't change America right now in the short term. You can't change the church right now in the short term. But you can't change you. And you can't say, I'm not going to yield to that. And if enough people start seeing that kind of model, then you can actually have the beginnings of a new life.
The woman asking the question said about people watching this violence unfold, they get off on this. And then Moore said there were practices that became normalized. But why is that? How have these practices of putting humans in the path of alligators become normalized? I would say these practices became normalized, at least in part, due to how white evangelicals think about justice and celebration in their worship. In her book, The Music Architect, Blueprints for Engaging Worshippers in Song, Constance M. Cherry explains, quote, an ancient formula dating back to the 5th century is the Latin phrase lex orandi, lex credendi, translated, the rule of praying is the rule of belief. Essentially, the proposition is this: what we pray becomes what we believe in the context of worship. The idea is that all corporate worship is prayer, and that the words we use to pray ultimately shape what we believe. The songs we are given to sing shape what we believe. In fact, worship songs have such power in shaping people that Cherry adds, quote, the majority of belief comes through what worshipers say and do in worship rather than in what they hear from systematic theologians or learned preachers, unquote. Ultimately, as we've seen, the goal of corporate worship that's done within the walls of the church is to affect the whole life worship of the believers that are done outside the walls of the church. And so white evangelical worship songs shape white evangelical beliefs, which are lived out in white evangelical relationships and politics. Cherry says, quote, a third and vital term is sometimes included in the phrase lex vivendi, meaning so we come to live. Then she sums it up. As we worship, so we believe, and so we will live. So with white evangelicals overwhelmingly voting for a violent authoritarian leader 3 times, we must trace their politics of power back to its root. As we worship, so we believe. We must follow the politics back to the worship that shapes their affections. If your worship is shaping your affections to celebrate violent authoritarianism, eventually you're going to vote politically for violent authoritarians. My piece for this week that I wrote for Baptist News Global is titled, Preston Wood Celebrates Trump and Supreme Court in Morning Worship. It was published on July 2nd, 2025. It's about one of those patriotic services that are often held around the 4th of July, and this one was held at Prestonwood Baptist Church in Texas. And I want to read one section of it for you. The heading says, Wielding the Terrible Swift Sword of Wrath. And in my piece, I said, Empires tend to sacralize the power of those at the top, dehumanize those below, and wage war against those who won't submit. And that's exactly what we find in Prestonwood's patriotic worship service. The gathering began with 3 white guys singing, He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. It's the same song that was sung during Trump's inauguration, which launched his reign of cruelty over women, LGBTQ people, the poor, and non-white people. While this song is often sung at patriotic gatherings, it speaks to a theology where justice is considered to be violence against human bodies, where the gospel is not the good news of liberation that comes from God identifying in and among the oppressed, but from God being represented as the empire, wielding wrath on those below. This top-down wrath-satisfaction view of justice and the atonement was evident in Prestonwood's use of other song lyrics. Till on that cross as Jesus died, the wrath of God was satisfied. As R.C. Sproul once said, justice is the Most High God saying, God damn you. Or as John MacArthur put it, Calvary is more about the wrath of God than it is about anything else. God brought hell to Jerusalem that day. God showed up in wrath, and the interesting thing is, it wasn't wrath on the Romans, and it wasn't wrath on the Jewish leaders, and it wasn't wrath on the people. It was wrath on the Son. God unleashed the full extent of his fury on Jesus Christ in wrath with fierce anger. And God, who is the punisher of all the souls in eternal hell, shows up in the darkness of Calvary to punish his Son, and he gives his Son eternal hell. In this white evangelical theology of justice, cruelty is its currency. If you want to know why I harp on top-down theologies of power and punishment so much, Alligator Alcatraz is Exhibit A. Once you realize that white evangelicals are willing to celebrate as good news a justice that includes billions of their neighbors swimming and screaming in a volcano forever for not submitting to their theology, Alligator Alcatraz t-shirt stands make all the sense in the world. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Monday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.